All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jada Peets, and I'm sitting here with the Chesapeake Police Department's Chief, Kelvin Wright.
Hi.
And today we are just here to talk about everything that's been going on in recent media. And I'm a student at Howard University studying to become a human rights lawyer. And there's been a lot of distortion in the media with certain facts and things. So the best thing for us to do is to come straight to the source of our police department and just basically answer some questions about the relationship between the Chesapeake Police Department and its community. So today we'll be asking the chief some direct questions that have been coming not only from myself, but from the citizens from a poll that I've taken from some certain citizens from the Chesapeake area.
Very good.
Do you have anything to say to anyone out there?
I want to say thank you to Jada and everyone that's watching for participating in this live broadcast. This is important to us. Certainly, we are at a time where, in my life, I never thought we would be. I thought that the civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s would have gotten us to a point where we would not have to do this or live through this again. But as a person of color, a man who has 2 sons and a grandson whom I love dearly, I feel I have an obligation to make sure that their lives, that they, in their lifetimes and in future lifetimes, never have to go through something like this again.
Thank you for that. And I just want to thank you again for sitting down with me and being able to answer these questions for your citizens. So my first question I have to ask is, just to open up, what are some thoughts on the state of current events given the death of George Floyd and the headlines of protests that have been going on?
Well, I think that the current state of affairs is certainly miserable, but enlightening in this respect. We should not be here. The things that we have seen since the advent of Rodney King, I can go too many names to mention, of actual video showing police misconduct for which people either were not charged, disciplined, what have you. And this is the culmination of all of those things that people of color have endured for as far as I can go back. And again, these things that happened, Walter Scott, I mean, I can, oh gosh, the other young man from Minneapolis, I can't think of his name right now.
George Floyd.
No, the other young man who lawfully possessed a gun,
Right.
told the people he has a gun and still, I think his name's there, but none of it escapes me. But here is a young man who has a gun and a permit for it, and he ends up still losing his life. This is unacceptable. And so the current state of affairs is that we are headed to a point to where I think real positive change is achievable. Jada, correct me if I'm wrong. All that I'm hearing, particularly from the protesters, is simply this: people of color are not asking for anything above anyone else. They're just saying we want to be equal justice for all, and that's the message I'm hearing. And that has been the message since I was a child, when Dr. Martin Luther King was leading the civil rights movement. We're not asking. We're not asking for anything above anything anyone else has. We're just saying we want equality.
Well said, and much agreed. So now the Chesapeake Police Department,
Philandro Castillo.
Right, yes.
I apologize.
So now the Chesapeake Police Department's motto is, in partnership with the community, promoting a safe city through prevention of crime and enforcement of laws. So I want to talk to you about the relationship between the CPD and its community.
Yes, ma'am.
So research shows that law enforcement cannot build community trust if it is seen as separate from the community. So what actions have you and the CPD taken to build trust in the community between citizens and its officers?
Chesapeake has we've been engaged in community policing since about 1996. And we will say that we have seen the fruits of our community engagement and outreach to the community. We have done a number of things. I can go through a whole list of things that we're involved in, but let me just give you a few programs. We have a youth academy, an adult academy, police academy. We have a camp that we run every year for youths. We require our officers to go to community meetings, neighborhood meetings, what have you. and we are actively engaged in the affairs of our community and with people in the community. I get invited to cookouts, churches of people throughout the community, people of color, white people, what have you, and I attend. And I'm amazed at the people who know officers that work in our community, and that's important to us. We feel that you cannot police from a distance. You cannot police from a car going 40 miles or 25 miles per hour through a neighborhood with the windows up. You have to actually be out and talk to people. In the same token, I think that it's incumbent upon citizens to get to know the persons that are policing their communities. It's civics. It is simple civics. Every citizen has an obligation to be involved in the affairs of the community. And law enforcement, perhaps, is that one piece of government that most people can point to as touching their lives, if not daily, nearly daily. So we are involved in a whole lot of things. We have backpack giveaways for school supplies. We have a daycare operation that we have adopted to make sure that the kids have toys at Christmas time, at Easter. I mean, there's a whole list of them. But I'm not trying to say that we're perfect by any means. And yes, there is work to be done. But we feel that our efforts have been, actually should be considered a national model of how to get involved in the community, engage the community. And if you're familiar with President Barack Obama's policing 21st century task force on policing, there are a number of chapters in there that talk about community engagement and how to do it and why agencies need to do this. We're believers in this. When it was published, we looked at the whole report and said, okay, what are we doing that's already contained in this document? And what should we be doing that also contains that we're not doing? And we feel that we are currently doing about 95% of the things that are required or asked to do. And I believe, as a law enforcement practitioner, that more communities across this country will be better served if they followed most of the things, if not all of the things contained in that report.
And I would just like to add on to our viewers that even this conversation right here is an outreach to the community, because I'm not representing a business, I'm not representing anybody, just one citizen in Chesapeake. So the fact that you took the time out of your day to come talk to me, even though I'm just one freshman at Howard.
You're a freshman?
Yes, I'm a freshman at Howard, yes.
Bravo.
So thank you for that. That's a really big step that I feel is awesome for our community.
But this is an example of which, honestly, someone calls and says, look, I want to talk to the chief. And of course, I can't talk to everyone, but you will get someone to talk to address your issue.
Right.
Yes.
So moving on, what are some weaknesses you see between the relationship between the police department and its community? And how do you plan to fix these weaknesses?
There are two that stand out immediately. One right now is this COVID epidemic. It truly has hampered our ability to be out and about in the community doing the things that we do. I'll be glad when we get back to a state of normalcy where we can have that type of contact that I believe is necessary for us to connect on a personal level with everyone. And I think the second portion is the ability to get our message out. It is very difficult to compete with mainstream media and social media about the things that you're doing in the community or things that take place that someone spends a different way other than what took place. And to some degree, we in law enforcement, because if something is actually a criminal investigation, there are privacy rights that attach. There are also the fact that it's a criminal investigation. There's certain details. There's certain details or information you cannot release. And as much as we'd like to be able to provide information of greater detail, it's not an easy thing to do. So now people fill in the gaps themselves as to what they think took place, and things take on a life of their own. And one of the perhaps best ways for people to actually get information is about to what really took place. If there are in fact criminal charges, go to court, or at least follow what is briefly reported in the media as to what took place. A prime example was a few years ago, we had an Asian man killed by a security guard in Riverwalk. And within the Asian community, it generated a lot of concern that this guy shot this unarmed man, and it appeared that we were not doing anything to further investigation. And I received calls literally from across this country and some from outside this country is, why aren't you guys doing this? If he was white or black, y'all would be doing something, y'all would have done something by now. But because of the nature of the circumstances in which this event took place, we want to make sure that what we charged this young man with, the perpetrator, was precise and would stick, and that you have the opportunity to make sure you get a conviction. When it first occurred, I'm very pleased with the manner in which our officers investigate crime. They tell you exactly what they think. Because I said, look, I can't do this job. We can't do this job if you withhold information from me. If you think something's wrong, you need to say it, then we can figure it out. So the detective and the officers that worked that scene, I arrived the next morning, and I'm looking at the things, and I was like, something didn't add up in my mind. So I go to the detective, what do you got? This, that, whatever. And it doesn't add up in my mind. I said, okay, let's keep digging. Let's get all the information we can, and we even work with the Commonwealth's attorney to make sure that we just don't charge this gentleman with, say, the lesser charge would have been manslaughter. When in fact, at the end of the day, this young man was convicted of first-degree murder. So as you know, there's manslaughter, second-degree murder, first-degree murder, capital. So this guy ended up with a very significant charge and convicted of such. So that's the key. And it took us time to get there because there's video cameras in people's yards that you have to go and get to make sure that the time, it lines up the time, and all these events line up just right so that you can present this information to a jury or a judge and you can get a conviction. So that took us, gosh, close to 3 weeks from the time of the event took place to the time we actually charged them, and yet the community was very upset throughout that whole time. But I will say this to their credit. When we charged a young man and when he was convicted, I received a few phone calls from the people thanking us for our efforts. And so the key is sometimes having the patience to stick with it and confidence that the police department is not sweeping something under the rug. You know, this thing that happened in Georgia to Ahmaud Arbery. The more facts that come out, the scarier it gets. Yeah. And I cannot believe that here in 2020, a law enforcement agency has behaved in the manner in which they did. That just befuddles me.
Agreed. So what is the CPD actively doing to make Chesapeake citizens feel safe with the police department during these times of unrest?
I receive a whole lot of phone calls as do our precinct commanders, the government officials, emails and so forth. And we are trying to show a presence in people's communities and of course in our business corridors. But more than that, we have a number of civil marches or protests taking place. And we have reached out to the organizers, and they have been gracious enough to talk with us and say, how can we do this safely so that no one hijacks their protests, so that it's peaceful and that it does indeed have the intended outcome of showing that they stand in solidarity with people, not just across this country, but as you know, people across the world are protesting what took place in Minneapolis. And they want to show that they stand in solidarity and want actual change in the criminal justice system for African Americans. And so for us, for them to welcome us or even reach out to us and say, we want you to participate, that tells me that they have confidence in us at least to say, hey, we believe you to be people of goodwill, and we believe them to be people of goodwill, and we are going to work with them to make sure that their protest is peaceful and that it is noticed.
Right. So how do you guys believe increasing service initiatives support communities of color?
That's always a challenge with us. And what we do, for the most part, is we look at demand, and we put our police officers where the biggest demand is. But we also train our people with implicit bias and about cultural diversity. But more than that, I teach the ethics portion of our basic academy and for our incumbents in service training. And we always talk about how is it that you treat people, how is it that you engage them, how is it that you view them, and that you have to be aware of the things that you do and your biases that are pre-programmed in you, and how they affect the way you view others. So you need to make a conscious effort to make sure that you are indeed not allowing your biases to color the way that you see people in the situation in which you find them. The greater number, hands down, 99% of the people in any community are good, law-abiding people who want their communities to be safe. They don't want the random gunfire, they don't want the drug dealer on the corner and so forth. And that being said, we try to even train our dispatchers so that when we get a call, hey, there's a black man walking down my street, we're like, well, what does that mean?
Right.
We're trying our best to make sure that their bias doesn't make us biased.
Right.
And so that we just don't pick up on a guy very like Mr. Aubrey who's just running down the street, out jogging. We don't want their bias to affect our bias, to affect us. So it is a challenge daily to make sure that we are indeed doing what we're supposed to be doing in a proper manner. But again, back to my ethics portion, we said, look, what does it take to spend a little bit of time with someone to make sure that things turn out okay? Would you treat your mother this way? Would you want someone else's brother treated that way? Take your time to do what's right. Do so in a kind and compassionate manner. And people will remember you and how you helped them. Because that's the key. You always remember who helped you. Right. I know we're pressed for time, but I got to tell you this story. This is so true. Monday, I was on a conference call with NAACP. And they asked me to say some things, and I spoke. And at the end, the president, Ms. Helena Dodson, asked the group, hey, anybody got any questions for anyone? Well, nobody had any questions, but there's a gentleman on the phone who's the pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church in Norfolk who said, hey, I'd like to say something to Chief Wright. He says, Chief, I have a young lady who's a member of my church. I'm the pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church in Norfolk. And she was involved in a domestic assault. She's a little small young lady. And I saw her the other day, and she had been in a domestic with her boyfriend, and it was obvious that he assaulted her rather savagely. And he said that the police were called. I shouldn't have said North. I didn't want to dime out my other city, but nonetheless, the police were called. And the officer did not necessarily handle the call the way he thought it should have been handled. And based upon what he told me, I agree with you 100%. And he says, more than that, the young lady came to Chesapeake to get an emergency protective order for her boyfriend. And our police officer, who really has no stake in this, didn't just provide her direction to the magistrate's office. He spoke to her how to make sure she's not a victim of domestic violence, how to get an emergency protective order, how to retrieve her property. And he spent 35 minutes with her, helping her through something that he says, I just knew that it wasn't right. And I'm saying to myself, that's what we're supposed to be there for. That's the mission of law enforcement. Not to just say, I'm going to point you in the right direction and walk away. No, how can I help you through this? And that's what we want from our police officers.
Definitely going the extra mile. Even hearing that story makes me, as just an individual, feel more comfortable being here. And I think it's really interesting that you guys do police bias training for your dispatchers. That makes me just feel much more comfortable if I'm calling, if I get a call or if I'm calling the police. And that just makes me feel more comfortable as a citizen. I really enjoy the fact that you guys train your dispatchers.
It's throughout the organization. And training, particularly now since we are in a pandemic and there's a recession, training dollars are the first thing to dry up. But we're committed to this because we know that it is the right thing to do for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, our dispatchers, they take some flack from citizens when they call in, and you can hear their bias. You just send somebody out. No.
Mm-hmm.
We need more information. We're not just going to send somebody out because you see somebody in your neighborhood that doesn't look like you.
That should be shared with all police departments. I commend you guys on your efforts to be able to do that. So with the massive amount of protest against police brutality that has been going on all over the world, there's been various videos and reports of aggressive use of police violence against protesters. In the event that our city has a protest, which there's been a lot of talk about, bringing light to police brutality, how has the CPD discussed at all how to handle peaceful protesters and non-peaceful protesters?
Okay. You handle peaceful protesters just like you would everyone. You make sure that there's a communication and not necessarily, just let's talk about what is it that you're trying to achieve and how we can facilitate you achieving what it is that you want to do. And just some basic rules, particularly dealing with safety. That's what we communicate to the people who are protesting. If we're doing such and such, please be careful not to step out in traffic. We don't want you to get hit. If we block traffic, please confine the protest to the area in which we have designated. We want to make sure that everybody comes and leaves the same way that they arrived. People who are not, who are violent, unfortunately, we're going to have to take some, if it were to occur. We like to think that it does not occur, but we're not so naive to believe that it's not or could not occur. We try to use the absolute minimum amount of force to stop the violence, and that's the way we approach it. Absolute minimum amount of force.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
And how will you as chief hold officers accountable if they do use excessive force against protesters?
Well, that being said, everybody's got where the cameras. We review every use of force to make sure that it is indeed appropriate and proportional to what's taking place. And give you how our process works with use of force, because that's one of the things that probably been the most asked question that I've had the last week. Do your officers use excessive force? Or how do you have a policy that governs the use of force? From any contact an officer has with a citizen that results in force, and by that we say anything beyond just escorting them to the car, you have to do a report. So if you strike someone, use OC spray, anything beyond just that, like to just escorting them to the car, you have putting handcuffs on them, you have to do a use of force report. Your camera's supposed to be running all the time. If your camera's not running, there's a problem. You have to deal with me. You don't want to deal with me. But that use of force is reviewed by their chain of command, their sergeant, their lieutenant captain. It is also reviewed by ethics and conduct, which most people understand that to be internal affairs. And it is finally reviewed by the majors, the deputy chief, and myself. We review every use of force to make sure that it was appropriate in accordance with our policy and proportional to what was taking place, and according to your training. And for the most part, 99% of them are in accordance. If someone has stepped out of bounds, it is usually something we're like, well, why did you do this? Explain it to what was going on in your mind. Why did you do this? And like I said, they're very rare, and they're not necessarily excessive. They're just not in accordance with the way we describe when you should use force. And people get disciplined and if you don't report it, somewhere around along that line, it gets found out. If you don't report the use of force, you've got to deal with me again. So you deal with me for using the force, and you got to deal with me for not reporting it. And for us, those are the things that we are very intent on making sure, so that we can guarantee, or as closely as we can, because we know we're dealing with human beings. Human beings sometimes do things that are not in their best interest or according to our policies. But the thing is for us is to make sure that we're delivering the same type of service all the time, and that it is proper.
Gotcha. So I'd like to discuss what's being done in Chesapeake to prevent our city from becoming the next Minneapolis, okay? So what changes has the CPD made to its police training program in response to current events?
Well, we're taking a look at what others are doing with regard to civil unrest, and we're asking ourselves, is that what we want to look at? Do we do enough pre-planning training of our people to make sure that they are instructed on the latest methods and proper methods of dealing with civil unrest? But also, how do you make sure that someone does not do something that actually becomes the ignition point for civil unrest?
Mm-hmm.
So to that point, we try to make sure that all of our people receive training annually on our use of force policy, and of course, how we, the cultural diversity, the implicit bias is done semi-annually, to make sure that our policies are accurate. We review our policies annually to make sure that they are accurate and that we're adhering to it. Just because you have a policy, if you have a policy and you're not adhering to it, or that's not what actually gets done, well, what actually gets done is the policy. And I'm a stickler for the rules. I'm rules oriented. Mm-hmm. If the rules say that this is the way we do this is the way we do business. And I marvel at sometimes how we seem to be a step ahead of most agencies. I attend conferences at the state level and the national level. And they always have something that's going on, you get some update about best practices and what have you. And when these guys are telling me what they discovered what they're doing is a best practice, I look at myself or whoever I'm attending and say, we've been doing that for years. So the key is to make sure, for me, that you're training people on the best practices. And along the same lines, I allow my officers, an officer at the lowest level, can make a recommendation to us, to management, as to say, you know what, we're doing this. It would be better. We probably would be better and have better outcomes if we did it this way. Okay, give me the proposal, help me see the vision. All right, I got it. We're going to change the policy and practice, and we're going to do this.
That's really good that you guys are promoting open communication within the police department, regardless of rankings. So I appreciate that.
But along the same lines, we also have a number of citizen groups that we work with, and they give us suggestions about things they like to see us do. And if it fits within our mission, we do it.
Gotcha. So with understanding police interactions, we understood that at times it can be an intense interaction. So what type of de-escalation training have police officers received?
They receive de-escalation training at the academy. We also do it departmentally, annually, about how to go to a situation and do your very level best to lower the temperature. We tell them they have an obligation to go to a scene and not make things worse. Your job is to go there and make things better as best as possible. Sometimes we know that despite our best efforts, sometimes things are beyond our control. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I suspect most people know because they may have family members or neighbors or friends. During this pandemic, there's a number of people who have mental health issues or drug issues, and these things have been compounded by the pandemic. And much to my dismay, the number of people who are drug overdosing, the number of people who have mental health issues that are manifesting themselves in a way to where they have to be committed, those numbers have skyrocketed. So we said, look, when you go to these things, try to treat the person, and we make sure we train our people on how to deal with people who are suffering mental health issues, people who are autistic, people who have medical problems. It's a big training deal. Our academy is 27 weeks long. All of it is not about use of force. It's about dealing with people and how to make sure that you're treating people justly, kindly, appropriately. So for us, it's always a continuous training loop on what's the latest things that we need to be aware of so that we are not misreading a situation about what perhaps is wrong with someone. Say, for instance, someone who is hearing impaired. We have to train our people to recognize that what you're seeing, or someone who's autistic, who is non-communicative, or perhaps try to figure out what's going on and not just go hands on, oh, he's drunk or whatever. No. Slow things down, try to figure out what's going on, properly assess the situation, and apply the proper remedy. This is an ongoing training that we do all the time to make sure that we get the best possible outcome. And sometimes, again, it's difficult, but just because it's difficult does not mean you can walk away from it. No, we're the agency that's charged with dealing with this. That being said, let's go out there and make sure that we're doing it the right way.
That is so important because there's been too many situations where people have been victim to just mistreatment simply due to their mental health illness that police officers maybe didn't recognize. So that is just really important for this community that you are actually emphasizing constantly how to recognize mental health issues and how to deal with that when approaching somebody. So appreciative for that. So there are a lot of citizens, including myself, that are curious about the disciplinary procedures that are within the department. So just for our viewers, this is questions that we got.
Sure.
Who is in charge of handling misconduct, or who's the best point of contact if somebody is experiencing something like that?
If you have an allegation of misconduct, two things to do. First and foremost, everybody's required to wear a name tag. Not only that, if you ask them their name, badge number, what have you, they're required to give it to you. If they don't give it to you, that's a problem. Okay? You should either, if it's really pressing, call dispatch, ask to speak to a supervisor. If it's after hours, if it's during business hours, call our ethics and conduct section and someone will address your issues right away. We will at least take your complaint. And then, because our officers wear body-worn cameras, our first thing is we've learned not to make any assumptions. Mm-hmm. You tell us something happened, okay, we have to be a blank slate and look at whatever's the video captures, if the video is available, and it should be the majority of the time. It should be able to be, we have to be objective when we look at the video to make sure that what has been reported to us is either verified or not verified. And let me back up just 1 second. People think I should have cameras on people all the time. Well, here's the dilemma. A number of officers work part-time. The camera is for officers that are working full-time. They're here on the job. I don't think it's proper that the taxpayer pays for a service that a private vendor is going to benefit from. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a question of dollars. Video, the storage of it is very expensive, so we're trying our best to make sure that we are very judicious or very careful with expending the taxpayers' dollars. But once someone has made a complaint, no one's required to sign anything. I know some agencies do that. I've always been saying I don't think you should require a citizen to sign something saying that whatever they've seen took place is swearing over to it. It's okay for me, whether the allegation is true or false. We want to get to the bottom of it, to the facts. Once the investigation is commenced, the officer is required to talk to us. It's called guarantee. They have to talk to us as a condition of continued employment. They have to talk to us. They have to answer every question that we ask that's pertaining to the investigation. We do the investigation. It is then reviewed by the ethics and conduct supervisor, and finally by the major's deputy chief or myself. Most of them, and we receive on order about 3 complaints per month on officer conduct or behavior. For us, that's not a lot, mm-hmm. but it's okay. But they vary from he didn't do something right to he did something very wrong. Mm-hmm. And the majority of them, actually, we discovered through the process that the officer may have done something wrong, but not necessarily what is alleged. And if that's the case, we still discipline them. Mm-hmm. Even if the allegation, even if we discover that they didn't do what the person alleges, if they didn't follow our policy, we still deal with that. But it goes through completely to a range of disciplines, from counseling to reprimands, verbal and or written, to time off, to finally termination. And I gotta be honest with you, most of the time, I believe I'm consistent with discipline. We post to our people, not necessarily who did what, but we post quarterly what the allegation was, whether it was founded, and the discipline. I think the officers are savvy enough to figure out who did what, and know this is not what you should be doing, especially if it was founded and someone received discipline. Our biggest challenge, not just here, but across this country, is when the chief of police disciplines someone, whether he gives them time off, and because these things are grievable, time off or termination, they're grievable. And I get that. I have no problem with that. But if I terminate somebody, you best believe termination was in order. I've had 2 or 3 people that were terminated, grievance panel reinstated them. One eventually separated. Actually, 2 both eventually separated. The third, I refused to provide him a gun and badge. You're going to do some other duties. But the issue, I would not allow him to have contact with a citizen where he has the ability to issue them a summons, take any kind of enforcement action against him. I don't think it's right. But a grievance panel has heard evidence, and they believe that they know better than the chief of police, the human resource director, the city attorney, who all review this, and the city manager, who review the discipline and say, yeah, that, based upon what we're seeing with the discipline that you, particularly with firing somebody, relieving them, they agree that the discipline was appropriate. But a grievance panel come back and reinstate them, and that happens not just here but across this country. And a police officer, let's be honest, there are people who are in law enforcement and any other profession that should not be there. Very critical here for us. And for me, as a matter of conscience, as a matter of doing what's right, I do all I can to make sure that we do not have people here who are not doing the job the way it should be done and are a danger to others or a problem for the people in the community.
Right. And while these officers are being investigated, are they able to work?
It depends. It depends upon the nature of the allegation. If it's criminal behavior, for the most part, typically no. If it's a matter of policy violation, yes. Because most of the time for a policy violation, you're not really in danger of losing your job. But criminal behavior or gross behavior, something, yeah, we will take someone off the street.
Gotcha.
Yes, absolutely.
And for your background check procedures, do you guys look into, for aspiring police officers or even current police officers, do you guys look into if they've ever been connected to any racist groups?
Yes. We try our best to vet people, and it's actually easier now because of social media.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It is easier today than it was 10 years ago when social media was either in its infancy or didn't exist. But we try to check their threads, who they're affiliated, groups that they're affiliated with, posts and what have you, look for certain things. And on top of that, there is a psychological examination as well that looks for biases, things, who don't you like? Whether you hate people of different gender, transgender people, gay people, straight people, people of color, whatever. We have a psychiatrist that administers a device and actually does follow up with every applicant. And if they do recommend that we do not hire somebody, they tell us why and we don't hire them. And if we find something in someone's background that is troublesome to us, we'll give them an opportunity to explain, but I don't think I've hired one that's got a problem in the background that I'm uncomfortable with.
Right. Gotcha. So you talked about the use of force policy before, so I want to start regarding the use of force policy. Do you seek input from the community about your use of force policy?
No, we have not. And perhaps that's a good idea, and that's one of the things we're going to have to do. And it's an area in which we fall short.
So you would be open to?
Absolutely.
Gotcha. And in your use of force policy, it states that officers shall document any application of force which goes beyond restraint or causes injury, except for those advising in training or departmental demonstrations, and this includes non-lethal weapons. Are these reports or documentations available to the public?
I know we we publish a document internally, and recently I had the opportunity to look at Houston PD's webpage, and I saw what they post with regard to use of force. So we gathered all the data, and we're just trying to figure out how to post it so people can see it. We're gonna post it online. Our challenge is people be able to put what they're seeing in context. But we do have the data, and we're going to post it. It probably will be about 30 to 60 days before we do it. We're just trying to figure out how to make sure that people get the proper context so it doesn't generate a lot of, well, I think you're doing this, whatever it is. But I think numbers alone don't show the whole picture, but the numbers are what the numbers are. And we'll be more than happy to provide that. We're going to do that.
So that just to confirm, this is something that's in the works?
Yes, that's correct.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
I told you, I'm not afraid to use an idea from somewhere else. I just happened to see it. I was like, this is good stuff, and I think we are obligated to do this.
Well, that makes me happy to know that that's something that's in the works. So we already talked about the wearable video cameras that were mentioned earlier. So just to confirm, not all officers wear the video cameras.
All officers who are working on the clock have them. If an officer's in uniform working for Chesapeake Police Department, they have a body-worn camera. And that's everyone below the rank of sergeant. We do have a couple of sergeants that wear them, but because again, we're dealing with finite resources, we want to make sure that every officer who has the majority of contact with citizens is the one that are wearing the camera.
And what happens if they're found not wearing them, or if while they're doing their police duties, it's not working?
Well, for the most part, there is a discipline. The good news is this: most of the officers, most of the calls they go to are calls that require more than one officer. So most of the time, I'd say 98, 99% of the time, we don't necessarily, when an officer doesn't turn the camera on, it's very rare now, because the practice is, even at the training academy, we give them the camera so that they know the moment you get dispatched to a call, that's when you hit the button to start recording them. Okay? Now, there have been times where something occurs so quick the officer forgets to turn on the he's sitting in his car, something happens, they got to put the car out and run. But we try to train that into them as well, and that takes time. But still, nonetheless, if an officer doesn't have their camera on, we look at their history. We look at their history, and and the nature of the situation. And we say, okay, you didn't have your camera on this time, it was a traffic stop, you should have had your camera on, this is a warning or counseling. Don't let it happen again. And we use what's known as progressive discipline. And like I said, for the most part, most of the officers, other than traffic stops, most calls they go to, there's usually another officer there, and they know that if you're on scene, you're supposed to turn the camera on. So there are very few instances that officers have been involved in that we as management are aware of, where there's been a complaint and we have no footage whatsoever. Very few. That's very rare. I don't know if this is one of the questions, but I feel like I'm compelled to talk about this.
Go ahead.
I'll be very brief. We have a system called an early warning system. Okay? If an officer is involved in pursuits, use of force, certain other behaviors, all that stuff is captured, and we get an early warning system saying, hey, you need to take a look at this officer closely and see if there's anything going on. And we bring them in, we look at all the activity to make sure that they're okay, or is it just happenstance, an anomaly that you've been involved in all these different incidences, you know? And we counsel them, and if necessary, and there may be even where there's opportunity to do remedial training. And that's an early intervention system we have in place to make sure that we keep an eye on what's going on. So if an officer uses force on a citizen more than, according to our policy, if they just use force, say 3 times within a month, it sends a flag to us, and hey, you might want to take a look. You know, they may have all been proper, but still, take a look, be aware, let's, look at it even closer. So, because if you look at it individually, as a human, a whole lot of that stuff, when you have 200 officers, well, a little bit more than 200 working the street, that stuff starts to run together. And that's why we have a computer program that says, take a look.
That is so important, because I feel like there is a global feeling of that the police departments are not taking accountability for their own actions. And so for the fact that you guys have that on a computer-based system that alerts, that shows that the Chesapeake Police Department is taking accountability for anything that may be going on and is actively looking out to make sure that its officers are keeping its people safe. So very appreciative that that's something that's in the works and in place.
No, it's in place. It has been since 2000. We actually bought the system in 2010, 2011, but we went back to 2008
Wow.
and put the data in from there. And we took hard copy data and started in 2008 putting in the system.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I just want to talk about the diversity within the police department. Are there any diversity initiatives that are going on within the CPD?
Yes, we're always recruiting people of color and from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
We really want to increase the number of minority representation of women on the police department. I know that our numbers have pretty much always fluctuated between 10% and 13%. 10% and 13%. And this is a very real world fact. Young ladies and people of color who come here typically come with college degrees. They work a few years at local law enforcement and then go on to federal jobs. And I'm okay with that. We'd love to have them stay and do a very nice long prosperous career and work in this community. But something happened a few years ago that I was like, this is the right thing to do. Even though they're aspiring to do something different, let's hire them anyway. A young man we hired years ago when I was a sergeant, very fine gentleman from Halifax County, Virginia, went on to the Postal Service. And I don't know if you recall this or not, but a few years ago there was some bombings down in Florida. Guy was bombing things, what have you. I'm at the store, I'm looking at the story, they're doing this press conference, and this guy walks on TV as the Assistant U.S. Postal Service Inspector. I was like, that's Gary.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him. He says, Kelvin, hey look, I owe everything in my law enforcement career to starting out as a Chesapeake police officer. I learned how to be a law enforcement officer by being a Chesapeake police officer. And now this guy is actually the director of the United States Postal Service.
Wow.
How can you be upset with that?
Right.
That's what we want, people who are good people to go on and do great things. So for us, it's a constant challenge to recruit and retain anyone, but particularly people of color, because the federal agencies pay much better, greater opportunities to work anywhere in the continental United States, and perhaps even outside the continental United States in a different kind of environment. But one of the things I hear people say a lot is that policing should look like community. I wish that in a perfect world that were the case. I wish that would be the case. But in reality is the police departments probably should look like the applicant pool. By that I mean, how many people want to be plumbers, electricians, whatever? It's about your applicant pool. Because we are not able to go out and draft people. People come to us. So we hire from the people who show interest in wanting to be police officers. So when we open it up, and we've done all the recruiting and all that we can do, and outreach trying to get people to come in the police department, and I get 500 people to apply, but yet 20% of them are minorities, well then that's what I got to deal with. But nonetheless, they should get through the process at the same rate in which they applied.
Okay. So
for me, I think that we should strive very hard to make sure that we hire the very best, the brightest, and people who are willing to do things the way we ask them to do. When we do the recruiting, we actually tell people, look, you need to come out and ride with us. We want you to see what we're doing so that you can say, you know what, this fits what I believe in. Like I said, you read our mission statement. Well, those are words on the paper unless you're actually doing those things, unless you're committed to it. And people who embody those things that we want done in policing, those are the people we want to hire and retain. they're the ones who are going to make the positive effect, positive change on the criminal justice system.
Right. Do you guys possibly have a diversity panel within the CPD that, for its workers?
No.
Would that be
But
something
can you,
you'd be
yeah,
open
can you
to?
give me a little bit more detail on it? I'd be more than happy to take a look at it.
Maybe like a program where minorities that are police officers can come together and maybe just review some diversity initiatives within the department and within its community, just something.
Sounds good.
Yeah, just something maybe to look into.
Yes.
But that's the end of our interview, and I would just like to say, is there anything that you want to say to our community right now?
I know these are very difficult times, trying times, and it's easy to paint everyone with the same brush. I would ask that you be open-minded and come on out and see us. Come out, ride with us. Come out and, when things get better, we have our junior police academy, send your young people. When we have our youth camp, send our people. When we have these days in the community, please engage the officers that are there. Any citizen in Chesapeake can come out and ride with a police officer just by coming out filling out a form. If you're not a convicted felon, and even some of those will consider, no, really, it depends on what you were convicted of and how long ago it was. Because I don't believe that if you did something in your youth, it should prevent you from doing something, later on. I really don't. Mm-hmm. We are trying each day to be more open and transparent and want people to be engaged with police officers, because it's easy to think of people as a uniform or something other than human. Well, you can call me, when I introduce myself, I always, I don't introduce myself as chief of police. Hi, I'm Kelvin, because that's who I am. My wife, she kind of gets tickled with me when restaurants are open. I always said, when the waitress or waiter gives me their name, I always call them by their name. It's hard to be, it is better for us to forge communications on a personal level rather than me direct your, as a title. And for me, that's important. I think it's important that people meet one another on a personal level rather than as an authority, non-authority level.
Well, I would just like to thank you for taking out the time to come talk to me and talk to your community, and just thank you very much for talking to us today. And I hope that you're staying safe and that your staff is staying safe. And just thank you again so much.
Thank you, Jada.
And thank you all for viewing. And I hope that this answers some of you guys' question. And again, stay safe for everyone that's watching. And thank you for being here with us today.
Excellent. How long you been in?
Thank
Where do you
you.
live?